So for the last few years, our relations, the American relations with Russia and Turkey, have both been deteriorating. Our relations with Russia have deteriorated in large part because of Russian anger at American policies in Ukraine and elsewhere, and Russian aggression, and our reaction through sanctions and condemnation to Russian behavior, and of course Russian intervention in our election has only made things worse. With Turkey, we've had poor relations in part because the leader of Turkey, Erdogan, has been taking more and more efforts, especially since the attempted coup against him, to crack down on human rights organizations, on international organizations, and to pursue a more aggressive policy of his own in the region. On many issues, Russia and Turkey have been working together, but one area where they have not been working together is Syria. And it looks like this assassination of the Russian ambassador was connected to Syria. So we are likely to see an escalation of tensions between Russia and Turkey in the short run.
And Berlin, something similar?
Well, we don't know fully what happened in Berlin, but I fear that what we're going to see in Europe is more concern about terrorism and more right-wing efforts by various political groups in Europe to call for restrictions on immigration. And Germany has taken more Syrian immigrants than any other country in Europe. And more efforts will be argued for to crack down on civil liberties. So we're entering a moment now where we're likely to see more pressures on civil liberties around the world.
So, and branching off that big picture question, but from Donald Trump today to what's happening in Putin to Syria, the government in Syria kind of winning or about to win that civil war, it seems like we're moving into a time where there's a lot of strong men in play.
Yeah.
Strong men in place. So, is this like a reaction to that? I mean, if they feel that they can't go anywhere else, they have to go violently?
Well, I think what all these events today connected to the Electoral College vote show is that traditional notions of democracy are under pressure around the world. Traditional assumptions about leaders who emphasize tolerance and discourage authoritarian tendencies, those traditional ways of acting are under pressure. And we are seeing a turn toward more authoritarianism, we're seeing a turn toward more unilateralism, and we're seeing a turn toward more hatred and categorization of different groups. And I think what we're likely to see going forward is more efforts by countries like the United States, Germany, Turkey, Russia, to restrict immigration and restrict civil liberties in the name of security.
And I know we've talked about this kind of big picture with terrorism before, but terrorist attacks usually kind of speed the process up of authoritarianism, cracking down on the civil liberties. These terrorist attacks could speed that whole process up in Russia, in Europe, in America.
I think so. I think one of the effects of terrorist attacks, especially when you have a confluence of them at the same time, is that they create a bias towards security measures and a bias against civil liberties measures. They also reinforce prejudices people have towards certain groups. And so we're likely to see more anti-Muslim rhetoric, we're likely to see more restrictions on human rights, and we're likely to see with Donald Trump more efforts for the United States to stand strong, which will mean less cooperation, less diplomacy, more military activity.
And does this impact Texas in any particular way before now, or besides Rex Tillerson or Rick Perry being now part of the cabinet?
Well, it's interesting that there's such a direct Texas connection to Donald Trump, even though he didn't have much of a connection before now, with the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Energy both being Texas-based. I think the events today will have two huge effects upon our state. First of all, we'll see more efforts by the new legislature when it begins in January to restrict immigration into the state, to act now in tandem with the federal government rather than against the federal government on those issues. It will be harder for cities like Austin to remain sanctuary cities. So that's one element we're going to see of this. Second, I think we are going to see more of an effort to work closely with some other quasi-authoritarian allies. And we're going to see a pull away from some of our relationships with other countries. And many Texans have been doing business with countries, particularly Mexico, where we're going to see less support for those relationships from the federal government. So Texas will be affected directly.
And all the oil connections we have with the Middle East, does disorganization in the Middle East, does that impact Texas companies?
Well, it does. Insofar as there's disorganization in the Middle East, many Texas companies are obviously heavily invested there. But right now, a lot of the oil that Texas companies are producing is Texas-based, and the relationship with Russia, if that relationship improves, will open up new opportunities there. The world oil market is going to shift significantly, not simply because of American fracking, but also now because Russia might come back online into the oil network in a way it hasn't before. So we're likely to see some shifts there, but I think that's less about what happened today. What today affects is the way the United States and the way Texas deals with immigration and the way we deal with business relationships outside of the Middle East with Mexico and countries like that.
Have you got any questions? Anything else you want to talk about?
Yeah, one other thing I think is really important is I think what we are seeing also around the world, and today is more a manifestation of that, is more and more separation of different groups. There are moments historically when we see more integration and moments when we see more separation. And we're in a separatist moment. The United States is separating itself off, Russia is separating itself off. And that's likely to create a change in the way we see the world. I think the last 15 years or so have been pretty cooperative. We're going to see less international cooperation.
Awesome. Do we a two shot or something?
Sure.
Just back it up.